And a huge warm welcome to my guest today, Michelle Windridge, who I'm really excited to chat to about all things early years. But first, let me tell you a little bit about our guest. Michelle is the National Education Lead for school-based EYFS, championing and supporting high-quality early years provision nationwide. With over 20 years' experience in primary and early years education, she brings together classroom expertise, school leadership, and national strategic insight. She writes regularly for TES, Teach Early Years and Early Years Educator magazine, and contributes to higher education as an external examiner for primary education studies and early childhood studies. Her background spans senior school leadership, lecturing in education, and achieving FHEA status for her impact on teaching and learning in higher education. We are in for a real treat today. So please let me welcome Michelle to the podcast today. How are you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me. I feel exhausted listening to that. I feel like I need a rest. It was over a long period of time.
It was all done last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, last week, yeah.
It's nice though, isn't it? It's really important, I think, for us to take the time to reflect on all the things that we do as individuals. And we don't often have everything listed out like that, do we? So it is nice to reflect and go, look at what you've done. Like, it's incredible. And I'm really happy that you're here, because based on what I've just said, you've got so much experience, so much expertise, and from previous conversations that we've had, so much passion as well in what you do. So I've no doubt that you're going to have a huge amount of insight for our listeners today. So thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Can you... Very welcome. Can you just start us off by telling us a little bit about your journey through early years and primary education, and kind of what led you into your current national role?
Yeah, so my career began firmly in the classroom. My first job as an NQT back then was as a reception teacher, and I worked as a class teacher across early years, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, and those early experiences really shaped everything that followed. I never started out as someone that was really passionate about early years and I wanted my career to be in early years. I just sort of went where the work was initially. But as I developed and as I grew, my understanding of children's development grew, and the realities of school life, the complexity of early learning. And it's something that as I moved into school leadership, I took with me that passion and that belief that early years really is where it all begins, and that as a whole school, as a whole community, we can really learn a lot from what happens in early years and what excellent practice in the early years really looks like. I moved into higher education then after COVID, which was fabulous, supporting the leaders and the educators of the future in undergrad and postgraduate studies, and I'm still in touch with a lot of them as well, and that's just fabulous as well, watching their careers grow and their careers change. Is something that's just wonderful, and seeing their passion as well grow, sort of start off in the lecture theatre and then grow with them is just wonderful. Over time, I became increasingly interested in how policy, research and practice interact with each other. And that naturally led me to where I am now, which is the best job in the world. I get to support early years provision at large scale and small scale, and really thinking about what works for children and practitioners.
Is it really different? Because working on a national scale is, I imagine, very different to thinking about individually within a provision or a setting or something like that. Is it hugely different in your role now?
I think it's about being with people and working with people. So although I work across the country, it's about making relationships with those staff in individual schools that I absolutely love, and that feeds into everything else. So I almost feel like everything happens for a reason, and I'll meet somebody at a conference, I'll visit their school. I was at a school in Newcastle that has children from birth now, and that was fabulous, and then that fed into another conversation I had in a school in Coventry, and then that feeds into training that we put on. So yeah, it's all about the relationships with people and how they link, and then how we can feed that into our offering for CPD and supporting practitioners and fighting for change in policy as well. Yeah.
I think when we talk about policy, I think people can get really confused really quickly, because I mean, it sounds scary, doesn't it? Especially if you don't work within that space and within that role, and someone starts talking to you about policy, it can feel very scary. But I guess as you're working through it and picking it apart, it's just like anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is. When I think back to when I was in the classroom, I implemented what I had to implement and I went to my training
Mm,
sessions and things like that. But I never had the time or the energy or the desire really to read policy and research and ideas about what was happening next. It was only when I moved into leadership and then into higher education that I did that. I think it's really
yeah.
important that we try and bridge that gap between research and policy, which I know you work a lot with as well, bridging that gap,
Yeah.
and how actually when we're tired practitioners on the ground, how that can be implemented as well. I love
Mm.
trying to bridge that gap and see how we can support each other.
It's so important. I couldn't agree more. And I think when you think of the word policy and you think, oh gosh, like that's going to be really intense and that's going to be really complex, and actually when you look at it in terms of translating that into what that looks like in
Yeah.
practice, as you just said, they're probably already doing a lot of it just as second nature anyway, but just not really kind of earmarking it as, oh, that's implementing the policy. It's just within their practice. And I think sometimes it's just naming what they're doing and saying, actually, you're already doing a great job, and this is how we can just strengthen that within the classroom. So I think it's really important what you say about making that transition of putting it into context. That's what people
Yeah.
find really, really hard.
Yeah, people are tired, people are busy, people are
Yeah.
doing the best that they can, and we want to try and keep our fantastic practitioners and in the job. We know people are leaving, we know people are exhausted, and sometimes I think when we hear, oh, there's a new policy or there's new research and we need to do this, it can feel like, oh, it's yet another thing. And
Yeah.
I did start to get a little bit like that in my practice as well. You know, you're tired, you've seen things come in and leave and then come in again. But it is about empowering practitioners to recognise actually we're doing a really fantastic job and we're doing this already. It's just called something else now, or
Mm,
it's just worded in a different way. But
mm,
practitioners out there are doing a fabulous job day in, day out. It's hard work and they're not always recognised. The whole
yeah.
stage itself isn't recognised within the sector for just how
Mm.
important it is all of the time, I don't think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so my background, I worked in schools and preschools and nurseries before I went into research and higher education. And when you're actually working in the field and when you're actually seeing in the classroom the amount of pressure and stress that our teachers are under to do everything that they're supposed to be doing, it is really, really hard. And I remember being in the classroom and saying, when I kind of got to that tipping point of, was I going to stay in the role that I was doing, or was I going to move into higher education and research and policy? And I kind of said, I can either stay here and continue to complain to my colleagues about how tired, overworked, stressed, confused, and how I couldn't be the teacher that I wanted to be, or I
Mm,
could go into research and try and be part of the change to enact
yeah.
some of that policy development. And I was thankfully given the opportunity to make that transition. But I remember those days being in that classroom, and like you say, a new policy coming in and you're putting all of the effort into translating that into classroom, and then, oh, but it's been changed or updated, or we just don't do that anymore. It's
Yeah.
just, it is constant. So anything that we can do to support our wonderful practitioners on the ground in doing that is fantastic. Um, Thinking about from your perspective, so you've got the wonderful position of having kind of that national viewpoint of what's going on. How would you describe the current state of school-based EYFS in England?
I think there's a lot of excellent practice that's happening, and it's driven by highly skilled, committed practitioners who aren't always recognised for what they're doing, both in terms of status and pay. But it's a
Mm.
fragile picture, especially with school-based early years. We're under significant pressure. There's lots and lots of pressure on school-based early years leaders, especially with the government's target of 75% of children achieving GLD by 2028. That balance between play and formal learning and outcomes and gathering evidence for outcomes is a careful balance, really. And you need a confident school leader to trust an early years practitioner and early years leaders in order to do the right thing and to keep the
Yeah.
pedagogy of early years at the heart of everything. There's a lot of outside influences putting pressure on early years. We hear the term school readiness, which I know we've talked about a lot as well.
Mhm.
There's pressure on nursery staff as well to get children to where they need to be before they start school so that they're ready for school and they're toilet trained and they're this and they're that. And it's just a highly pressured environment at the
Yeah.
moment. And my worry is that that's getting increasingly more high pressured with things
Right.
like the government's target. The GLD was never meant to be a teaching tool. It was always something to measure how children were in those core subjects and those prime areas of learning. But it can become a tick list of things that we need to be teaching, which means those creative subjects are sort of forgotten about because if, as a school, you're not judged on those creative subjects externally, the natural thing is that they will be in the background, which we
Mm.
don't want. We don't want children to not have the opportunity to be creative and to be to go and explore. So that's the worry.
Yeah. For anyone listening who kind of isn't familiar with all of this, what does GLD mean?
Oh, yes, sorry. So GLD is a good level of development. So this is how children all across the country are measured at the end of their reception year. So I think the last year there was 68.3% of children achieved GLD. And it takes into account things like their literacy, their math skills, social and emotional skills, their understanding of communication, and it's teacher assessed. So the class teacher in reception will gather evidence and say whether the child is achieving that or whether they're not achieving that good level of development. The government's target on the surface seems really positive in that we want more children to achieve GLD, but the danger is that we will be almost teaching to the test, we'll be teaching to the
Yeah.
assessment, and that early years curriculum will become diluted in an attempt to reach the target of 75% of children achieving a good level of development.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think touching upon what you said about the kind of creativity element of it as well. And I think for me, I'm very aware that, not every child learns in the same way. We need to be sensitive to the fact that children receive information and
Yeah.
process information in different ways. And especially when it comes to things like tests, I think, my daughter was a prime example of this, and she gets really bad test anxiety. Obviously, she's a lot older. It's not the early years, but, she gets really bad test anxiety. And so when she does kind of mocks or coursework and things like that, she gets really, really high marks. When she goes in to take the test, it doesn't
Mm.
translate across. And I think that's something that I've always been really passionate about, is actually acknowledging, seeing where children are at in different ways, and creativity is very much part of that, because having a creative way to demonstrate the acquisition of a skill, sorry, or your knowledge on a particular topic, I think is a great way to look
Mm.
at it. Whereas if
Yeah.
we're teaching to the test, as you say, or every child has to demonstrate this skill in one particular way, it's going to alienate a lot of children, and it's going to put a lot of children, it's not going to be reliable, I don't think, where
Mm.
they're placed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I was lucky enough to be in Parliament last week, and there was a debate about play-based learning,
Mm.
and there was a lot of discussion around the future being AI, and our children are going to be in this AI world when they grow up that doesn't
Yeah.
yet exist. It's changing so rapidly, and so we want children, we want the next generation to be creative. We want them to be
Yeah.
able to explore and to take risks, because actually, how relevant will jobs be in the future where they just need to retain facts and be able to recall them? I don't
Yeah.
know, but we're going to need to be able to do things that AI can't do, and that's
Yes.
where that creativity comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that kind of leads into my next question around the kind of biggest pressures at the moment for our early years practitioners, and I guess AI is one of those. But
Yeah.
are there any other kind of pressures facing our early years practitioners right now?
I think it's definitely workload. There's staffing
Yeah,
changes, there's the increasing complexity of need and accountability pressures. Practitioners and leaders are being asked to do more and more with fewer resources, whilst also responding to rising SEND needs and supporting families. I know at the
mm,
time of recording this, we're waiting for the SEND and inclusion white paper to be published. And it's a time where there's a lot of anxiety. Settings that I've visited recently, they're saying that children are starting their provision. It's a very different picture to it was 10 years ago. And it's not helpful to blame parents or to blame, you know, screens or it. That's not helpful. We need to be
mm,
working with our parents and our families and our family hubs and our communities to make sure that children are given the best start rather than blaming. But that takes its toll. It can be
yeah,
exhausting as the practitioner because you're often the one that's that's initiating all of these meetings and initiating all of this change. And on top of that, as we've said before, quite often early years practitioners, they're not always valued as highly as later
yeah.
phases, which is really, really difficult for morale and retention. I remember when I went from a reception teacher to a year one teacher and a family member bringing me a bunch of flowers for my promotion. And they said, "Oh, are you hoping to get all the way
No.
to year six one day?" And you just think, oh my goodness, like people do think that sort of
Mm,
in and out of the sector. It is seen as an easy job. And it's
yeah.
very difficult to keep defending yourself if you're in that sort of environment. So that's a big
Mm.
challenge as well.
It still surprises me now. So I worked in this field. I have worked in this field for a long time, and prior to coming into higher education, as I say, was kind of in the classroom on the ground. But that was kind of like 10, 15 years ago. And it still surprises me how things are still like that now. We still, and we talk, I mean, I remember being at university and doing my degrees and talking about the professionalization of the workforce and how we can make it more valued workforce and how we can encourage people to feel like that. And, that was like seven,
Yeah.
8, 9, 10 years ago. And we're still having the same issue. I think we have moved on a little bit. I do feel like
Mm,
there is more acknowledgement, but
mm,
I still don't think it translates across, even down to as well when we're thinking about that kind of gender stereotype and having
yeah.
men in the workforce, and being able to support a family on the wage and things like that. Like
Yeah.
it's still not moved on enough, has it?
No, not at all. No. And we know how important early years is.
Yeah,
The evidence tells us we know. Yet for some
the
reason,
research is there.
the research is there, but for some reason it's not acknowledged enough in
Mm,
society and within the education sector as well. Hence
yeah.
my flowers for my promotion to year one.
That's crazy. Where do you think this kind of misunderstanding comes from? And why do you think that it's still not changed all these years later?
I think early years is still seen as the preparation for real education by a lot of
Mm,
people. So rather than it being a distinct and vital phase of education in its own right, which we know, there is
yeah,
still this misconception that play-based learning is not as important as the real learning that happens once they get to key stage one, key stage two, key stage three. Going back to the debate last week, it was wonderful that so many MPs were talking about the importance of play-based learning in year one. That's what they were debating.
right,
However, in the room, there was still a large misconception around what play-based learning is. There was a lot of talk
right.
of local community playgrounds and things like that. I think the fact that still so many people don't understand what play-based learning is
Mm.
means that the early years is always still seen as not as important. Oh, they're just getting ready. Oh, we're getting them ready for year one when the real work starts. Whereas
Yeah,
actually, it's it's much more than that. It's a massive phase that's so vitally important and shapes the rest of a child's life. We know that.
Yep.
And it certainly shouldn't be something that stops at the end of reception and then the real work starts.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. But I think there is that misunderstanding about what it is. It can just be seen
Mm,
as childcare as well. Oh, it's just childcare, just looking after them, just playing in the sandpit. Whereas actually, we know that's not true. We know that high
yeah.
quality early years provision can change a child's life. It absolutely can.
Hmm.
But not everybody is aware of that at the
No,
moment.
and I think you're right in saying, we can have this phrase of play-based learning and we can all throw it around in a room and
Yeah,
discuss it and put it into policy and things like that. But if it doesn't have the understanding and meaning behind it, it is meaningless.
yeah,
You could turn around and say, oh, yes, well, the early years needs to have play-based learning and, all of the MPs and everything can say this. But if they don't understand what that concept is,
yeah.
that doesn't translate into practice, so it becomes meaningless. So again, I guess it goes back to what I kind of always bang on about around terminology and jargon and things like
Mm,
this. And it's so important that we don't over terminalize, is that a word? We don't kind
it
of
is now.
create it is now. We don't create all of these words and jargon and things just to kind of make it sound
Mm,
good and sound smart, when actually it doesn't matter because no one understands what you're talking about. We need to bring it right back to basics and
mm.
make sure that we're all on the same page, and that's how we grow and learn and develop and become, together as a community, all working towards the same goal, rather than everyone kind of just saying all the right things, but
Mm.
actually it make an impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were some MPs that absolutely got it and had some really valid points. But then there was some discussion around, oh, well, schools that do forest school, they've got play-based learning. Don't get me wrong,
Mm,
it's great if you've got key stage 1 and 2 going to forest school, but that one session once a week isn't play-based learning. We're talking about what's
yep.
happening in the classroom, and it goes back to that understanding.
Hmm.
So I started school in the 80s, and we started in year 1 then. So the fact that my generation, we didn't really have early years. I think I went to a little play group with my mum a few times a week, things
Yeah,
like
me
that.
too.
But it wasn't a big thing then. So there is that misunderstanding about, oh, is
Yeah.
is it childcare? Is it just getting ready for when they start school? Like when we started school, there is a big misunderstanding about the importance.
Mm, mm. And I think there is a lot being done to try and tackle that. As you say, we are seeing more and more research around it. People are talking about it more. The fact that it is going to Parliament and being discussed, this is all
Yeah.
progression. This is great. But we do need to acknowledge the fact that there is still a lot of kind of tokenistic work happening and kind of
Mm,
tick boxing of, yes, we're covering this because we do forest school once or
yeah.
twice a week. Well, actually, great, brilliant start. Let's work on that. Let's develop
Yeah.
it and, put it into the classroom. Talking of kind of terminology and things like that. So we talk about having a high quality early years provision quite often, and we see it in paperwork and things like that. What does that actually look like in practice?
So when we talk about high quality early years provision, we're thinking about a provision that's responsive and it's rooted in child development. So it includes skilled, highly skilled adults who understand deeply how children of this age group learn. They understand what environments that requires, what curriculum it needs, how to balance play, interaction, and intentional teaching as well. It's absolutely not about worksheets or making reception or nursery classrooms too formal too soon. It's about rich experiences. It's about language, curiosity. It's about forming relationships and emotional security as well. It's a highly skilled job. It really is.
Mm,
And knowing when to, as an early years practitioner, stand back and let a child take the lead in their play,
yes.
knowing when actually maybe to offer some support or an enhancement. It takes a lot of practice. It
Hmm.
takes a lot of understanding of how the child's brain develops and works. You need to be able to see that bigger picture as well as what's going on at that moment in your room. Yeah, no wonder we're
Yeah.
exhausted at the end of the day. Yeah.
Do you know what? This is so true as well. When you said that, it made me smile. And I wrote an article on this back in like 2018, something like that, when I was still studying at university. The whole kind of knowing when to step in And it's so hard. And so I was doing my degree at university and working as a practitioner alongside it. And I remember, so this was in my undergraduate, so I was newly into the profession. I was kind of finding my feet, learning all of the knowledge and information, taking it into the setting, applying it into context and all of that, and which was great. But I wasn't confident in myself as a practitioner at that point. And one thing I found really hard was the inner battle that I would have of learning all of this information and knowing or kind of learning myself when to step in and when to step back and observe and to think, right, how can I facilitate this? And the other half of me thinking, my employer is going to think I'm not doing anything if I'm just standing there watching. And that inner turmoil that I had as a practitioner of like, I don't want to step in because I'm going to kind of ruin what's happening in front of me, but I don't want my employer to sack me because I'm not doing anything because I'm just observing and I'm standing and watching. And I found that really, really hard. And I remember going and speaking to my manager at the time and being like, I am working. This is what I'm like, talking through my thought process, because half the time, if I went over to a group of young children and intervened and joined in, half of the time they would just stop. And they would just look at me for direction and be like, right, what are we doing next? When they were more than capable of, developing the play themselves. And that's what I wanted to see, is their skill development of developing that play themselves. But if I went over, they instantly would stop talking, stop doing it themselves, and would wait to be led by me. So it's that fine balance, isn't it, of staying on that kind of the peripheral edge and observing and knowing when to kind of just gently come in and facilitate something and then step back and let it develop and unfold in front of you. But it comes down to having the confidence as a practitioner to know that that's what you're doing and to not feel the pressure of having to look active all the time. It's okay to stand back. And I think that was the title of the piece that I wrote, is the Stand Back and Watch Them Play or something like that.
I'm going to hunt that down after this now.
I'll send it to you. Send it to you. It was for Early Years Educator magazine that I did it for. Yeah, I'll send it to you. But yeah, I think it's really hard for kind of new practitioners who are finding their feet and finding their confidence, and you're acquiring all of this knowledge and it's all making sense to you as a practitioner. So this is wonderful, but having that pressure inside the door, especially if you're in a role or in a setting that maybe don't quite understand that, and it's finding that balance. So that's why I was smiling when you were saying that, because I was like, this is so true. It's really hard to know, and that's why I think it's important to understand the sheer level of knowledge and expertise that the early years workforce bring. They're not just babysitters. They have actually a lot of knowledge and expertise and a lot of training to be able to stand back and watch. It takes a lot of education to do that.
Definitely. I remember feeling exactly the same, thinking, oh gosh, it does look like I'm just staring into space watching these children. And then when I was teaching on the PGCE, I'd have students say, okay, so tell me, how do I know the exact point when I need to go and sort of ask a question? And there's not an answer to that. It's just building up that knowledge and that experience and observing other practitioners in practice. So it takes a lot, and you've got to have confidence to be able to defend that as well, which I don't think other phases in education have to do quite as much in their practice, have to defend the why and that's happening. Like you say, I'm not just standing in my head planning my shopping list. I am actually watching their play and thinking about their next steps.
Yeah, and I think as well it goes to say a lot about the role of like having a key worker, and the fact that there are particular adults in the setting that will have a particular group that they know that little bit better, and they have those connections, and they know the families and the background and things like that, because then it's that little bit easier for that practitioner to be able to spot those moments, because they know those children and they know where they are developmentally, they know where they need to go, they know what support that particular child needs, they know the family environment behind the child. All of those elements are all going around in your head whilst you're watching the play unfold, to then know when to step in, to then know what the right question is, to then probe and answer. It's so complex. And I think unless you work in the field, or unless you've done that training and you've been that person, it's really hard to describe just how complex that particular role is of babysitting the children, you
Yes.
know.
Yeah, it really, really is. Yeah, definitely.
It's
We
so
all
hard.
deserve medals, all of us.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Um, so how can schools protect that play-based learning and that play-based kind of approach and practice within the classroom when there is so much
Mm.
pressure and accountability on those individuals to have those outcomes?
So it starts at the top. It starts with leadership, understanding, and having the confidence to trust what we know works in early years. So school leaders who can articulate why play-based approaches matter and how they support long-term outcomes are always going to be more supportive. If you're in a school where maybe that's not quite so understood, it can be a challenge
Mm,
if you haven't got that confidence that we've talked about to defend play and to defend how we teach and how children learn in early years. Um, so it's using evidence, being clear about curriculum intent and trusting professional judgment that are all going to help with that. I mean, quite often play and accountability, especially within primary schools, early years and key stage one, they're seen as opposites, but they don't have to be. Schools need to be brave in defending actually why we're using play-based approaches in our learning in key stage one and in the early years. And it's not
mm.
always easy, like we've said.
And that's really hard to do, isn't it? Because if you, as you were saying, if you don't have the support of the leadership around you, and if you don't have that kind of buy-in at the top of the importance of that play-based way of learning, then it's really hard down the line in the classrooms on the ground with the children to implement that. I mean, how can how can schools be better at doing that?
I think it's always a good idea to invite the senior leadership team into the early years to spend time if they're willing
Yeah.
to, so they can see what's happening and almost um, sort of talk through your thought process when you're standing back and observing play, so that they're gaining that understanding of what's
Mm,
happening and why that's really important. But as a newly qualified teacher or a newly appointed member of staff, it can be really difficult to knock on SLT's door and say, "Oh, can you come
yeah.
spend a few hours in early years? I want to teach you all about it." So it is about trying to educate the rest of
Mm,
your setting outside of whatever your setting is, outside of that early years provision, including parents as well, about what's happening in early years and why that's really important. If they're willing, it's always a good idea to take SLT to visit other settings as well and to see
okay.
how things are done there, if they've got a play-based approach that's working particularly well. But again, if early years isn't high on the SLT's priorities,
Mm.
it is really difficult. So send them to me, send your SLT to me, and between the two of us,
Michelle will sort them out.
I'll sort it. It'll be fine. I'll sort it. But there's no easy answer. It is about
Yeah.
I'd start with inviting them down to early years to find out what happens. Not just a learning walk, not a lesson observation, just to come and spend time informally within the setting and seeing how it works and seeing how all
Mm.
the interactions that are going on, all the provision, how it all comes together.
Mm.
Is a really good place to start. Then send them to
Yeah.
me.
Do you see a difference in early years within a school setting and early years separate from a school setting?
I think it very much depends on the setting. So I visited recently a fantastic school in Coventry that takes children from the age of 2. And when you're in early years there, you know you're in early years, like you absolutely do. The head teacher is really passionate about early years. They've extended continuous provision up to year 3, which is really, really
Okay.
exciting. So you really know that you're in early years. They've got everything that you would see in a PVI setting in place. Some schools you go to early years and you feel when you're in reception like you're in a year 1 classroom. So that it's it's very different depending on the leadership, the style. Obviously, in school-based earlier settings, there's that pressure that we talked about of the GLD at the very end of reception that maybe you wouldn't always get in non-school based settings, although they have assessments to carry out. So there's always that pressure and that looming statutory assessment at the
Yeah.
end of the year. But I've seen some fantastic provision in both PVI and in school-based early year settings when it's been allowed, when school leaders have really been on board. A school that I visited in Stanley, when they were expanding their school-based early years, they worked with local PVI settings and they spent time there. And then the PVI settings sent staff to their school for CPD for the staff. So when that
Right.
happens, it's wonderful. And you can be in a room and you wouldn't be able to tell if you're in a school or in a PVI room. It's just an earlier setting. So it very much depends on the leadership, I think,
Yeah.
of the setting, of if it's in a school.
Yeah. And just for clarity for the listeners, the PVI is
Sorry.
the private. No, that's fine. It's just to make sure that people understand what we're talking about.
We talk
So,
about jargon busting. I'm just reeling them all off. I'm testing you.
no, you're giving us the examples, and this is what I mean. Like everything is full of acronyms and jargon and things like that. And if you're not in it, you can quite easily get lost in these sorts of things. So it's important to talk about these sorts of things so that we do get the clarity. So we mean in the private sector, private nurseries and schools and preschools and things like that in that sector. So I want to touch upon inclusive education within early years, because obviously we hear a lot of talk around inclusive education and SEND and neurodiversity and things like this. And we hear it throughout the education lifetime of a young person, but this is very much prevalent in early years as well, isn't it? So what does inclusive early years practice look like in reality?
So inclusive practice, it's always going to be proactive, not reactive. It's about those key workers, as we've said, knowing children really well, adapting environments. So not doing, oh, this is how we do it here, this is how we've always done it, but adapting to the children's needs and working with families and specialists as well. So when it works well, children can feel a sense of belonging and support can be embedded into everyday practice rather than being an add-on or an afterthought. It's increasingly a challenge as the funding and the number of children coming into our settings with additional needs is rising, and funding doesn't seem to be rising to match that. So it's not easy. It's a challenge, but I think it comes down to what I've said before. It comes down to relationships, and those relationships with external agencies and with parents and families as well, so that you can all work together and make sure that you're doing the very best you can for that child and being willing to learn. You don't have to know all the answers. It's absolutely fine if you don't know what to do, but being able to reach out and seek support elsewhere.
I think that's really key, actually, and I think that's really lovely that you've said that, because there does feel like there's a lot of pressure on our early years practitioners to know everything and to be able to do everything, and it is impossible, especially going back to research, how we are constantly learning new things and there is constantly new research coming out. It is impossible for anybody to know everything about everything. So I think that's really key. What you said is actually it's the relationships that we have with everyone, because if we don't know the answer, we know someone we can ask, or we know someone we can reach out to for support in finding the answer to that. And that's where we hear lots of times in early years talking about that kind of multi-agency approach and having lots of different links with lots of different individuals and organizations and things like that, because it's drawing on that support and expertise that actually gives it that rounded element of support and that, doesn't it? And it's really hard to have that expectation on one person to know all of the answers to everything when nobody knows everything. What's that saying? You don't know what you don't know.
Don't know what you don't know. No,
exactly. It is so true. Are there things that you think that can help our teams work better with families in terms of supporting if they have any concerns or worries regarding maybe SEND or neurodiversity?
I feel like I keep just saying the same thing, but strong relationships are the key. So practitioners, they need time, they need training, and they need the confidence to be able to have open, respectful
Mm,
conversations with families, with children's parents and carers. And that can be really difficult, especially if you're early on in your career.
yeah.
You can quite, I remember thinking, gosh, I'm 21 years old. I can't discuss with this grown up what needs to be done. It just can't happen. So we do need to support staff that are earlier on in their career in how to communicate with families, how to build up that relationship, because it doesn't happen by accident. Framing discussions around strengths alongside concerns. Quite often, if we have a child with SEND, paperwork and meetings and conversations focus on what the child can't do rather than what they can. So it's really, really important that we include the child's strengths in conversations as well as any concerns, and that families feel included as well and not judged. I know we've had conversations with each other about parents. It's hard being a parent, and you do
Yeah.
feel like you're judged a lot of the time. So it's really important that we make a safe environment where we can communicate with our families
Mm.
in a non-judgmental way, so that we can build that trust over time, which is only going to help the child.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think we talk quite often, don't we, about children in school and actually arming them with the life skills and, executive function and things around those softer skills, for want of a
Yes.
better phrase. And I guess that relays into our kind of adulthood and in this
Yeah.
sort of job. It's all well and good having all the theoretical knowledge and all of that information that you learn through your qualifications on child development and things like that. But actually, we need to be supporting our early years teams on things like communication,
Yeah. Yeah.
and having those discussions that can be quite hard sometimes. And as you say,
Mhm.
especially if you're talking about something that is a real challenge in their child's
Yeah.
day-to-day kind of experience, being able to have those gentle conversations with parents and build that support with
Mm.
them so that they feel comfortable to then engage back with you, and then you're working at it from all angles at
Yeah.
home, in the setting and things like that. But I guess it's a bit of a given, isn't it, that you just know how to talk to parents, when actually you could be the most highly qualified, uh, you know 40 million degrees under your belt, but
Yeah.
actually you might struggle with
Yeah.
the actual communication and language element of talking to people. So I think that needs to be thought of as well. And it goes back to, I know you said, oh, I keep coming back to relationships, but relationships are key. They
Yeah.
are so, so important at every level,
Mm.
in every sort of life experience that you have, every job that you have, every
Yeah.
educational experience. Like, it's there so much, isn't it? So I think this is why lots of things continuously come back to relationships, because
Mm.
actually they are vital. And if
Yeah.
you can't get that right, then that's going to make everything else harder, isn't it?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. We want to be approachable.
Yeah.
We want our parents to feel like they can talk to us, and we want a place of trust as well. We want to build
Mm.
that trust. Um, yeah.
So we're very similar in our outlook in terms of things like having access to information that's trusted and that's informed by evidence. It's one of the things that you and I kind of met over and had many conversations and excitable, passionate conversations
Yeah.
over. And as we touched upon earlier in your bio, you regularly write for practitioner-focused publications, bringing that information accessible. To you, why is it important that we give access to that trusted, credible information, but in that accessible way for people? Why is that important to you?
I think because research and policy, it can only make a difference if it's usable. Quite often, practitioners, they need writing and they need articles and they need information that respects their expertise, speaks their language, and acknowledges what their reality is. Quite often, policy can reflect on what an ideal situation is. So, stable staffing, time for reflection, access to support, and these don't always exist. So, it's really important that we try and bridge that gap between what policy is and what the reality is and how they can connect together.
Mm, no, completely agree. Do you think there are still some gaps between policy and actually implementing it in the classroom? Are
Yeah,
you
a
still seeing that?
100%. Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
there always will be. I mean, a perfect example is the talk we have on inclusion at the moment within our mainstream settings. Of course, this is really important. I don't think I've met anyone that wouldn't think inclusion isn't a great idea, but we need the funding, we need the staff training, we need the resources to go alongside that. It's quite easy to sit back when you're not in the classroom and say, yeah, we need inclusion in
Mm,
mainstream, but the reality can be very different on the ground. And it's about making sure both parties are aware of that, really.
mm. Yeah, I completely agree. Do you think we're getting better at doing that, or do you think we've still got a long way to go?
I think I think we are getting better in that it's easier now to access information than 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because of this amazing thing called the internet. It's easier to access accessible information as well, on different social media platforms, people sharing information. But I think the reality, it's there's always going to be a big gap. I think as long as the people I think it's really important that the people that are making the policy listen to the voices of the people on the ground. And
Hmm.
that does happen, but it could happen more. And that's what we need to try and bridge.
Yeah, I tell you what I quite like when I see that you have kind of like working groups and things like that, or people sitting on boards that have the lived experience.
Yeah.
So when kind of policy making is happening, I really love to see when there are lived experience or experts by experience on the team,
Yeah.
bringing in that level. So you kind of get that balance of the policymakers and then the people that have lived it, have that conversation, and both feed into the policy. I think that's great when that happens. I don't think that happens enough, but I
Mm.
think that's definitely the way to go. And to kind of what you're saying about having that balance and having kind of
Mm.
listening ear on the ground of the reality of, yes, this policy sounds great, that's not going to work in its current format. Let's take some advice from how we can translate this into context of it actually working. So yeah, I think I agree. I think that's great when that happens, and it does happen
Mm.
in instances. I'd love to see it happen more.
Yeah.
I think that would be really good. I just want to touch upon practitioner well-being, because we've spoken a lot about the pressure that we have on our early years
Mm.
practitioners. We've spoken a lot about how the high expectations are on individuals to know everything, do everything, be everywhere. you
Yeah.
know, it's
Juggling
a
everything.
lot. Exactly. It is a lot on one kind of individual. And I speak to lots of different people, and you hear words like burnout being spoken about, people feeling undervalued, overworked, underpaid, all
Mm.
of these sorts of things that are associated with working in the early years, which is really sad to hear.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what do you think could change to support it being a bit more of a sustainable profession?
I think it all comes down to early years being valued culturally,
Mm,
professionally, financially. So that includes fair pay, manageable workloads, high quality professional development, and a genuine respect for the expertise as well. Sustainability won't come from just expecting our staff to be resilient and just keep going. It needs deep structural change. We need to
yeah.
recognise on so many different levels what happens in early years. And we are getting better, as we've said. There are improvements, but there's still a way to go. And a big thing will always be the pay. It absolutely will
Mm,
be. If people can earn more money working in a supermarket than in an earlier setting, then it's just not right. But when the level of expertise that we've talked about that we need our
yeah.
staff to have, it really shouldn't be that way.
Yeah. No, completely agree. I think it'd be nice to round up at the end with a nice kind of positive
Yeah.
message for our listeners.
I feel like I've been really
Obviously,
miserable.
no,
Sorry.
you haven't. No, you haven't at all. But the landscape that, this is what it looks like for our early years practitioners. And, we have touched upon some of the really positive things, which is great, but there does need to be a lot of work done in this field. And we know that there needs to be a lot
Mm,
of work. And a lot of it is around the professionalization of the workforce and the valuing of the workforce, and understanding the expertise that comes with that role. And we've always known this, and unfortunately it is still very much something that's prevalent within the workforce. But there are lots of amazing things that comes with being an early years practitioner, and we've both reflected on our own roles in that field as well during our discussion, which has been lovely. And do you know what, I am a much better researcher now, having experience being a practitioner, having been on the ground, having been with the children, having been with the families, having worked alongside some amazing colleagues. I wouldn't be the researcher that I am now without that experience. So it's definitely exactly, it's a wonderful thing to do. And I think what you were saying earlier about having the buy-in from senior leadership teams, having the whole school approach early years with the same view and the same value is really going to be what's going to drive it forward. And that is, as you've said, that is happening in places. There are pockets of amazing practice and support and everything happening, which is great. So just to kind of close out, is there a message that you would want to give to early years practitioners and parents listening that will help them feel empowered about the workforce?
I think the message would be that early years matters enormously. The work that practitioners do every day has a massive and a lasting impact, even when it's not immediately visible. And for parents, I'd say trust the process and trust the professionals. Play, relationships and joy, they're all essential for our children in their educational journey and their journey through life. So it's really important that we trust the professionals who are leading this.
Yeah, absolutely. Michelle, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on and to have your expertise and insight in this field. If people want to reach out and connect with you, are they able to connect with you online? I know that you're on a few of the social medias. Are you happy for us to share those for people to connect?
Yes, I'd be delighted. I love a good chat. So yeah, please do.
Where can we find you online?
So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, and I'm dabbling with TikTok, but I don't fully understand it, if I'm honest.
I don't think half the people on TikTok fully understand. We just go with it, don't we? Throw it into the pit and see what happens.
My teenage son is mortified that I'm on TikTok.
I love it. Well, what I'll do is I'll put links underneath the episode. So anyone listening, if you want to reach out and connect with Michelle, please do, because as I said, the passion that you bring, Michelle, is just incredible. And I love seeing people love their job and love helping families, teachers, and everyone involved in the education sphere. So thank you so much for all the wonderful work that you do and for giving us the time today.
Thank you for having me.